Welcome to episode number 89 of the Fitness Devil podcast. Our march to 100 continues. It's kind of crazy to think about we're getting this close. So today we've got Jose Antonio. He's the co-founder of the ISSN. We'll tell you more about who he is, where he came from. He's energetic and fun. I hope you really like him. He's a big-time high-protein researcher, amongst other things. We talk about that. Some of the craziest shit we hear about high-protein intake, including a story about a guy who had twisted organs and needed surgery. We'll tell you more. Sleep restriction, some of the negative implications of sleep restriction, some of the effects of creatine and brain functioning, lots of talk about coffee, and Jose's passion for stand-up paddling and pursuits outside of exercise and the gym. Hopefully you enjoy it, guys. Thanks. Stay tuned.
Shut up and sit down.
Hey everyone, welcome back. As with many of our guests, I got to meet Jose Antonio when I traveled down to Dallas in January to see him present at an ISSN event alongside Elaine Norton, Brad Schoenfeld, a bunch of other great presenters. Jose, or Joey as everybody calls you, is a PhD in physiology. You co-founded the ISSN, and you're the program director and associate professor at Nova Southeastern University, Department of Health and Human Performance. That sounds like a mouthful. So welcome to the podcast.
You need an acronym for that.
Hey, yeah, it is a mouthful. Thanks guys for having me on. I think we can talk about all sorts of things. We've done a lot of high protein diet studies. We're actually starting some studies looking at the effects of creatine on the brain. We're also doing for people who are part of contact sports like the fight sports and football. We're actually looking at some data to see if we can predict who might have, I don't know if you guys are familiar with CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Absolutely.
I played football. I played football at university, so I definitely can.
Hey, you know what? If you're ever in South Florida, you got to come to the lab because we need more guinea pigs. So.
Oh yeah, I've been hitting the head
A few times. It shows up in most episodes.
Well, I think like even we talked about that once. I know we got a schedule, but Mike was talking about T. Nelson was talking about the CT stuff and CBD. And I think he mentioned creatine. But
Well, actually, I just came back from the Kansas City Fitness Summit, and he did a presentation on CBD oil, and that was one of the things that he dropped in there. So that's something that, well, we'll probably get Mike back and chat more about it. So I don't want to make this about Mike's presentation, but I did want to get straight to the fun stuff. And you mentioned you're known as the high protein guy. You have done some research where you've made people eat terrifying amounts of protein, where to say that they were uncomfortable was a bit much. So I've heard things about like 4 times body weight in grams per day. So what's kind of come out of that stuff? And then what are some of the generally accepted truths about high protein intake and some of the pervasive myths that are really just nonsense?
Okay, first let me give you a little bit of background as to why we even approach doing those kinds of studies. I remember one as a kid, my uncle, he was, he sort of wore many hats, but he was both a bodybuilder, but he also taught karate classes. So I actually was fascinated with the martial arts stuff. So I remember I'd watch him work out. He'd be eating, I don't know if you guys aren't old enough to remember this, but those old amino acid tablets that Joe Weider used to sell, when you open up the tub of amino acid tablets, it would just smell like dirty socks. It was just awful. And I asked him, why do you take this stuff? And he's like, well, your body's made of protein. Amino acids make protein, so this stuff must help. So, I mean, in a very rudimentary way, he sort of figured out what to do. And I remember him saying, hey, you know what? To gain weight, I eat more rice and meat. To cut, I eat less rice. And that was basically it. So I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. So clearly he knew the value of protein. And then sort of fast forward, so teaching at Nova Southeastern University, I remember approaching one of my students who, fairly large guy, and just out of curiosity, because I always saw him eating, I'm like, so how much do you eat and how much protein do you eat? And the beauty of working with physique athletes is that they're one of the few groups that actually knows exactly what they eat, which is interesting because a lot of athletes actually don't pay attention to that, which I think it's changing now in the performance sports, but in the physique sports, they could pretty much rattle off what they ate. And I remember he's sort of going through his Rolodex in his head. He's like, well, I eat this. And what's interesting, he tends to eat the same thing over and over, which is really what most physique people do. And when he told me the number of grams, I did sort of the mental calculation in my head, grams per kilo or grams per pound, and I said, "Wow, you're actually eating what would be considered a very high protein diet." It was about 3 grams per kilo.
Yeah.
And he says, "Yeah, that's just what I do. I mean, I sort of eat all day, so I guess it's not that hard to achieve 3 grams per kilo." So it got me thinking. I'm like, wow, this guy's pretty healthy. I mean, visually he's healthy. I mean, but when you're between 18 and 21, everyone's healthy. So, would there be any harm if we actually followed guys and or girls, if they're willing, to consume a high protein diet, whether it's for 8 weeks, and eventually we did a 1-year study? And here's the thing: in the back of my mind, as someone who's worked in sports science for a long time, to be honest, I thought it was it was one of those studies where I'm like, why am I doing this? Because I know there's no harm. This is me talking to myself. I'd be driving my car. I'm like, why the hell am I doing this? Of course it's not going to harm you. It's just food, but the problem is 99% of both professionals in our field and probably the general public, they believe that for some reason of the 3 macronutrients, carbs, protein, fat, protein is the evil macronutrient. So I thought, okay, we're going to do the study, just give people gobs of protein, and we'll just see what happens. And my guess is nothing will happen because nothing should happen. You're just, in this case, consuming just whey protein. So it wasn't like I said you got to eat more chicken or more beef.
Yeah.
The only way they could achieve this is really through shakes. Otherwise, in fact, some of the guys after the study, they said, if I did this through just eating food like beef, chicken, pork, or whatever, they said I'd be eating all day. And be honest, I wouldn't want to do it. It's just impossible.
Sure.
So they had to do it via shake. So the initial study we did, which I think you alluded to, was 2 grams per pound or 4.4 grams per kilo, which is ungodly high. We probably had 25 to 30% of our subjects drop out because they basically said, I can't eat this much.
Screw you guys.
I don't want it. Yeah. And what's interesting? A lot of them, their appetites disappeared from literally forcing themselves to drink whey protein shakes.
Oh, my God.
And so after the 8-week study, 4.4 grams per kilo, nothing happened, which is sort of what you expect. It's like there was no harm. We didn't change their training, so the goal wasn't to increase lean mass or decrease fat mass. It was just, let's just see what happens. So we followed it up with another study where we dropped the protein intake to about 3.4 grams per kilo. And the reason we dropped it is because the 4.4 grams per kilo, it was just too difficult for people to comply with. So we're like, okay, maybe 3 to 3.5 is more reasonable. But we also changed the training so it followed more of what I call a traditional bodybuilding training where you do body part split routine, et cetera, et cetera. So we did that, and after 8 weeks of that, we actually found that they not only gained lean body mass, but it was no different than the control group. But the big thing is they actually lost fat mass, which was kind of surprising. So a lot of our subjects, they would mention how they were constantly hot, they were constantly sweating. So clearly there was a thermic effect. And I hate to say it, but some of the guys especially, they kind of just smelled like sweat when they walked into the lab. And it's like they walk in, I'm like, my God, you guys got the protein sweats.
Well, did you guys equate for calories?
What's that?
Did you equate for calories with the control group?
Actually, we didn't. I wanted the protein group to actually eat more calories.
Yeah.
So that's what was interesting. The control group actually ate less calories than the high protein group, yet the high protein group lost more fat mass. But they both gained an equal amount of lean body mass, and I think that's where that's the cool part is you can eat more protein calories and still lose fat mass, which is fascinating.
That's not really that surprising because thermic effect of protein intake is about 1/3 of the calorie value, whereas
It's a lot.
Yeah, whereas like fats, I believe it's like 0 to 2%, and carbs maybe 2 to 4, 3 to 6% of its value, something in that range.
Yeah, I mean fat not much, carbs I've seen data 5 to 8% maybe, but even then, if you're eating a lot of simple sugars, I doubt the thermic effect is much at all. In fact, we have some of our original data. We looked at the thermic effect of just a protein shake, and in this case, it was a combination of whey protein and casein. And actually, we were able to find a thermic effect as high as 40%.
That's incredible.
So it's pretty high. It's pretty high.
Well, and that would have been like it. A lot of this stuff is kind of coming out now, where we're like, oh yeah, obviously. But like at that time, you guys had no clue what the fuck was going to happen. You know what I mean? Like
that's what's interesting about. We actually had no idea. From a safety standpoint, I thought, well, this is a waste. Of course, it's not going to be harmful.
Yeah.
The body comp stuff was kind of interesting because the first study where we just told them eat a lot of protein, they didn't gain fat, they didn't gain muscle, nothing. It was almost like if you don't change the way you train and just eat a lot of protein, just nothing happens. I mean, it's just you just burn the protein away, but you're not going to gain. And particularly when it comes to lean body mass, a lot of that is a function of how you train, not necessarily how you eat. Of course, how you eat is important, but if you don't change the way you train, there's no stimulus to increase skeletal muscle mass.
And I guess one of the other things you guys are probably looking for too is, if there's any harm from high protein diets. Everybody's heard that the myths about kidney damage or even liver issues. So none of that stuff showed up, right?
None of it showed up. In fact, we did a follow-up study for 1 year, and we actually took the most well-trained bodybuilders, and these were all male. And after 1 year, nothing. I mean, literally, it was. In fact, if you didn't know they were bodybuilders and you just thought these are guys off the street, and if you looked at their blood work, you're like, wow, these guys are super healthy. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them.
I suppose here's an interesting. I was going to say another interesting thing too. I mean, like, did you guys segregate it based on drug-free versus people who, or you just didn't ask about their drug use status?
I actually didn't ask, but if you're around these guys, physique guys, long enough, you kind of know who's on the juice and who's not. And I think these guys were all natural, except maybe one. And actually, even his blood work was fine. So
that's kind of the point I was getting to.
I guess
right?
it doesn't matter.
So if their blood work's coming back normal and maybe there's some use there, and that stuff's present, then I don't think the protein is doing anything, basically. So
yeah.
Cool.
Well, this actually leads, and I know we're kind of going to hammer protein a little bit, but you kind of shared an article about a man who needed surgery for quote unquote twisted organs caused by a high protein diet. So I guess this leads us to what are some of the craziest things you've encountered about high protein intake and what drives these beliefs, whether it's militant veganism or just some other pseudoscientific stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting because if I go back to my undergrad, and I'm fairly old, so I did my undergrad in the 1980s. So I remember as a junior taking my first nutrition class, the professor saying, she said, if you eat a lot of protein, she didn't even define what a lot of protein was, but whatever a lot is to her, it's bad for you. It's bad for your kidney. So that was the first time I heard it, and that's a long time ago. And we still keep hearing this sort of drumbeat of too much protein does X, Y, and Z. And that article you allude to, I posted on Twitter, has to be one of the stupidest articles I've ever read in my life, that somehow eating protein twisted your organs. I mean, how does that even happen? I mean, but someone wrote it, which makes it even funnier. So there was a journalist, I guess, stupid enough to actually believe it. In fact, that would probably top in terms of the most, sort of ridiculous things I've heard about protein. But it's almost always the protein kidney issue. That's what I hear constantly. And also, this one's a little tricky, but if you just eat too much, if you just eat excess protein, whatever excess is defined at, it'll just be converted to fat, when in fact it's very hard to get fat. If all you're doing is eating just more protein, it is very hard to get fat. If you're eating, chocolate chip cookies, it's pretty easy to get fat. So the getting fat issue, the kidney issue, the twisted organ issue, it's almost like it has a life unto itself, and it's just bizarre. And the thing is, there are also clinicians who seem to promote that, medical doctors and whatnot. For whatever reason, they still promote this belief. So it's not just the general public. Yeah. It's actually sort of individuals who are what we would call educated, but not within our field. So
plus it's hard. Like even if you just did it in shakes, like you say, people are getting sick of shakes. Like if I do that, like let's just say like that's 6-7 shakes. That's like 4 liters of water. Like most people don't get that much water in a day. Is
this just dogma that keeps getting passed down without these people going and learning about what's really true?
Yeah, I think that's basically it. It is dogma, and for whatever reason, it just won't go away. It's. I mean, I sort of liken the protein is bad for you, where people there are people who choose their diet camps. Keto is the best, veganism is the best, paleo, whatever the hell paleo is the best. all carbs are evil. It's everyone has their sort of pet diet, and it's like they don't veer out of that lane. And when in fact what they should do is focus on basic principles of eating for whatever your sport is, whether it's bodybuilding or for performance sport. Eat for the sport, not because it fits some preconceived notion about what you should or should not eat. So, but it's pure dogma, and it's just weird. And I even had an experience. I guess I can't say the university because then everyone would know who it is. But anyways, so I've taught at basically 3 different universities, and at one of the universities, I submitted an IRB that had to do with protein, and the most critical response actually came from it was a physician, and he says, you have to put in the IRB that protein causes harm. And I said, no, because I only work with subjects who are basically young and exercise trained, 18 to 30 year olds who work out. So I said, in this population, there's never been any evidence that eating a lot of protein is harmful. So he goes through his Rolodex and he sends me articles, not realizing that you're sending me articles about people who have kidney issues. These are people who are sick. They're diabetic, they're overweight. And I said, you cannot apply this population to a group of 18 to 30 year olds who exercise and are lean and fit. That didn't convince him though. I was like, oh my God. So I gave him this analogy. I said, okay, let's take cardiovascular exercise, cardio. It's generally agreed that it's good for your heart. But let's take this scenario. Let's say you present in the emergency room because you just had a heart attack. You're laying in bed. Let's say I get you up the next day and I say, you know what? We're doing cardio. So is cardio deadly? Will it kill you? Well, yeah, for that situation, you just had a heart attack. Now, will protein kill you? Well, you know what? If your kidneys don't work and you're in dialysis and you're diabetic and you're overweight, the last thing I worry about is getting a protein shake. So, but that still didn't change his mind. Still didn't change his mind. I had to put in the consent form that that there was a risk, albeit a small risk, a risk of harm to the kidneys when you consume a lot of protein.
Oh, that must have killed you.
Oh my God! I'd say I was losing my hair, but I ain't got no hair. So I was like,
that was how you lost it, because you lied.
We've got a lot of the stuff on your Twitter, and by the way, guys, like we always tell people, if we're going to bring a guest on here, they're worth following. So Joey's Twitter is actually the place where a lot of his cool stuff goes on. So just follow that shit. You get some glorious stuff. So another study, this time it was a legit one. You pointed how a week of sleep restriction was related to a reduction in daytime testosterone levels in healthy young men. So what's going on there, and what's some of the other stuff with poor sleep?
This is an interesting area of research because, it's sort of common sense to a lot of us that part of recovering from exercise is getting rest, and part of getting rest is getting enough sleep. That study that you mentioned, certainly if you don't get enough sleep, maybe plasma testosterone starts to drop. If you're chronically underslept, and here's the thing, it's hard to do a study where you force people to not sleep for a long time. So a lot of this is observational stuff. Like I couldn't say, hey, be in our 8-week study, and guess what? For 8 weeks, you get to sleep 4 hours a day. You're like, screw you. I'm not doing that study. So we look at these, we look at these studies that look at association. So we see that association. The other association you see is like you tend to see higher injury rates in athletes that don't sleep as much. Another association you see, and this one was interesting. I played around with high protein diets and sleep because I had seen data in obese people, and this is a perfect example of how one population can't be applied to another. So there's actually data showing that in obese or overweight individuals that if they went on a higher protein diet, they actually slept better. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I decided to do it in people who worked out and were in shape. And I found nothing. Nothing happened. I was like, oh, well, it helps obese people. It doesn't help, normal fit people. But what was interesting about that study was that regardless of how much protein you ate, most people who exercise don't get much sleep. And we're talking and I don't know how much you guys get, but these people on average got about 6.5 hours of sleep a night. So we're always told you need 8 hours, but I'm like, nobody is getting 8 hours sleep. I don't know a single person, at least in these sleep studies. Do you get 8 hours of sleep?
I actually, sorry, my voice. I actually lay down and I set myself to go to bed religiously 8 hours before I need to get up, and I'm pretty militant about it. That I wake up a few times a night. It doesn't mean that it's flawless, but yeah, I actually do set out, and I absolutely make sure I get 8 hours sleep a night. I really feel like hell if I get less.
Okay, so if you wake up and you notice the clock, you have 2 hours before that 8 hours, you just force yourself to stay there.
Yep, and I fall right back asleep.
Oh, okay. See, I wake up with the sun. I just wake up when I wake up. I don't have anything in the mornings, so I'm one of those lucky people.
Yeah, I wake up. I mean, for some reason, I wake up at 5 a.m. every morning, and it's kind of annoying, to be honest.
That's why you have no hair, man. We should study that one.
I would stay in bed for 12 hours if I didn't have a purpose to get up, and that's why I know that people say you should have a set time, but sometimes my first appointment or like today, this is the first thing we had, so I got to sleep in a little later. So I'll stay up a little longer, enjoy my evening a bit more, because if I go to bed at the same time and I know that, well, I'm going to try to get up a couple hours early, I won't fucking do it.
Yeah.
And then I get 10 hours sleep. And that's just
Wow.
wasting time.
You're like an anomaly.
I think so.
Like I'm like right where you said 6.5 to 8, usually on the money. It's the same time every day. Like 8.
I wish
13?
I could sleep 8 hours. I remember in college, I could just pass out and just wake up like 10 hours later.
That's alcohol.
No
induced.
more.
That's alcohol. They don't think they have studies on that one. Like the post-party sleep coma.
Exactly.
Actually, this kind of just because we're trying to push it, you got somewhere to be. So I want to we're talking about sleep. Let's talk about coffee. Like we're just gonna do fast lightning rounds because you're a smart
coffee.
dude. Yeah, and you link a lot of research about coffee. So we'll start there. Can you clear up some facts from fiction regarding coffee, if only for us personally? Because I love coffee.
Yeah,
that's why we bring people on.
Well, I will disclose that from about 2003 to 2009, I actually owned a coffee company.
What?
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize.
Did not know that.
I actually, most of my professional career has actually been in industry. So for a period, I was actually the science editor of Muscle and Fitness back in the early 90s.
Holy shit.
I owned a coffee company in the 2000s. I started ISSN. I co-founded it. So I've dabbled a lot in industry, and me and two finance guys, we founded a company called Javalution. We had a coffee called JavaFit, and basically it was coffee where I added dietary supplements to it. So,
Yeah.
cool.
but anyway, so being in the coffee business, I read up on as much as I could on coffee. And what's interesting about it is if you look at the observational data on it, it seems that you could drink a lot of coffee, and it actually will decrease the risk of most cancers. And again, these are association studies because, people say, well, there's no randomized clinical or controlled trial on it. And I said, because you could never do that kind of study. Imagine if someone said, hey, we're going to pay you $1,000 to be in a study, and you might be randomly assigned to the group that doesn't drink coffee for a year. You're like, I don't know. I'm thinking, how much would I need to be paid to not drink coffee for a year?
10 grand. 10 grand. I would do it for 10 grand.
Would you really?
It would be hard though. For sure.
What would you drink then?
Yeah.
What would you drink?
Tea. I would find something with caffeine, so it wouldn't matter. I would find something.
They got to make sure people aren't fucking off on the side and sneaking in coffee, right?
Just right.
Next thing you know, you find out that they're popping caffeine tabs.
I was just saying caffeine, ephedrine, and Advil. That's what I would do.
They had someone jacked up on ephedrine the whole time, or Adderall, or God only knows what.
There is something about coffee itself versus just the caffeine that seems really healthy, and it might be. Coffee actually is one of in fact, it's probably the most common food that we consume that has polyphenols, which tend to be good for your health. So there's other stuff in coffee because the data on tea, which again has caffeine, isn't as robust as the data on coffee. So, for a myriad of reasons, coffee can even be used as an ergogenic aid. If you take it pre-workout, it acts pretty much just as well as a pure caffeine tablet. And in fact, the original data on caffeine was done in the late 70s. A scientist named David Kostel, he compared caffeinated coffee to decaf coffee. Even though the study was termed a caffeine study, it was really coffee with, compared to, decaf. And he found that regular caffeinated coffee actually helped exercise performance. So, coffee, I always tell my students, I say, hey, how many of you drink coffee? And half the class raises their hand. And I said, do you realize the half of you that don't drink coffee, you're missing out on probably the healthiest beverage you can consume. There are benefits
Hell
to
yeah.
coffee that you don't see in water. There's no data saying, well, if I drink a lot of water, the risk of cancer goes down. It's like there's no data on that, but there's data on coffee.
That's cool.
Actually, this is one I already know the answer, but people, like, since we're talking about myths, if you drink coffee, you basically dehydrate yourself, thus it's bad.
That's a load of baloney. And here's the thing. People forget that what are the beverages we sit around and just sort of sip on all day? Well, I guess for some people it's water, but really for the vast majority of people, it's coffee. You just sort of drink it mindlessly. So you're part of the diuresis or the increased urine output is you're drinking liquid. Now, other than I only drink coffee in the morning, but the rest of the day, I actually really don't drink much. I might have water with a meal, but I'm not someone who constantly sips stuff. So I imagine if you're always at the office drinking coffee, you're going to be peeing all day because guess what? You're drinking liquid all day.
The way I've come to understand it is that caffeine itself, in isolation, is a mild diuretic, but the fluid volume of coffee offsets that diuretic effect, pretty much negating it. But like you said, because you're drinking so much fucking coffee, you're peeing more, it creates the illusion that, oh, I'm peeing, right? So
right, and think of this: if caffeine was like the diuretic that everyone said it would be, imagine consuming caffeine and pre-race or pre-sporting event in South Florida where it is hot all year. You would dehydrate yourself like crazy. You'd be dying. But clearly, it doesn't happen because people do consume caffeine or some caffeinated beverage pre-workout in South Florida pretty much all the time. So,
And just logically, that never made sense. Like that people still argue about that. Like, it's like the protein hurts your kidneys. Like, well, if you drink coffee, like, you're going to be dehydrated. It's like, listen, I drank a liter. That's more than...
I think in our world, we know the difference of these myths. And I think most of the listeners are going to be like, oh, this shit is like low-hanging fruit bullshit myths. And that's true in our world. These myths still pervade in the populations that we all deal with. So it's still really important to talk about them and not take for granted the simple stuff. People believe all kinds of ridiculous shit. I mean, people still believe, like you said, that we're talking about high protein is bad. How many people are we dealing with who think that carbs make you fat? Insulin carbs. I mean,
there was just an article today.
That stuff is still really popular. All of these crazy fad diets are largely predicated on some sort of ludicrous belief system that we all know is nonsense. But we come into contact with people every single day who actually believe this stuff. Fuck, I mean, we try not to get into crap like this, but there are people out there who believe that vaccines are bad for you, right? There are militant people protesting with signs because they think that vaccines are fucking awful. Meanwhile, I got measles everywhere all of a sudden. So
Spencer had a good meme. What the hell was it?
I'm not even sure. I just saw his Game of Thrones memes. So
yeah,
you know, Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, I presume. So.
Oh, yeah.
I figured you'd be familiar.
He had a good vaccine one.
Before I forget, actually, I was also sitting down and I was hanging out talking to Dr. Sue Kleiner, so she can't see this weekend. So she said hi. I told her that you were coming on. So if I'm not mistaken, she was one of the co-founders of ISSN. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
She was part of the original group of 5 of us that came up with the idea back in 2002. It was actually at a American College of Sports meeting in San Francisco. So. I remember when we first came up with the idea, I was thinking to myself, well, who's going to do all this work? Like, holy geez.
And it's like, I have the fucking book. Like, it's insane. Like, anyone who actually wants to, like, learn about this stuff, it's not just, like, petty stuff. It's, like, it's deep.
I want to also, while we got the chance to, because we'll run out of time at some point, is you guys have your national conference. I was at a regional one in Dallas, and that was unbelievable. Sohee Lee asked me to come down and got to meet Lane, because I've always followed Lane and followed you and Brad Schoenfeld. So, like, the 3 of you guys was like Christmas for me. So now you guys are having a big one in June in Las Vegas. So I don't know if you want to shout that one out and just let people know about it.
Yeah, actually, our 16th annual conference, it's June 13 to 15, so it's in a little bit over a month. We're in Las Vegas, Nevada. We're at the Tropicana. It's a Hilton property. In fact, this might be our last. Actually, it will be. This will be our last conference that we're having on the western side of the United States. Our national meeting from now on, starting in 2020, will always be in Florida. Why? Because I like Florida. I like the beach. So that's that. So if you guys don't go to this one in Vegas, in 2020 we're at Daytona Beach, Florida, which is a really nice beach. I mean, even if you don't go to the conference, go to the beach. It's really beautiful. If you can surf, you can try and surf or paddle or whatever. So, hey, you know what?
This is perfect. That's basically the last half. We're just going to talk about surfing, paddling.
Yeah. So another thing that you're really well known for, of course, is your stand-up paddling. So being out in the water is a big passion of yours. And we encounter this stuff all the time. And too many people in our industry just suck at prioritizing time away from our work. Work-life balance just isn't a real thing. How do you set those boundaries and set aside time for your paddling, the non-work activity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know what's interesting is because I run into a lot of some of my colleagues at different universities who, for whatever reason, they don't make time to work out, even though at one point in their life they were crazy, but they were gym rats and I get busy, the kids kids are in the way, et cetera, but what's interesting, like my wife and I sort of do the same thing. The first thing we do when we wake up is, well, I drink coffee and she drinks energy drinks, but I go paddle and she goes to the gym. And it's been a habit that's been ingrained since I was, I think, 13 years old. I learned it from my uncle he was I alluded to him earlier. He was a bodybuilder / karate instructor. And he was super dedicated that unless he was super sick, he would always train. So I remember watching him like, wow, he works out all the time. So for me, I sort of block out pretty much 5 days out of the week, early morning, for just me to go to the water. And you guys are in Canada, is that correct?
Yeah, well, I have a paddleboard. I have a blow-up one. It's not as easy. I can't wake up and go, so we go to like a lake 45 minutes out. But our dog and I go.
So,
it's awesome.
I bet you the water's cold as crap.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's
colder than Florida.
We're up in Edmonton, Alberta, so we're nowhere near the ocean.
You can't paddle right now.
The only person in our industry who is semi-famous from Edmonton's Dean Somerset. He's up here with us. And we are not near water.
We're not paddling right now.
No.
Yeah, it's like here, because it's warm all year round, you can fall in the water, and actually the water is really refreshing. So, people say, I'm a hardcore paddler, but really I'm hardcore. I love hot weather, and I happen to paddle, and I like I know people who are hardcore, meaning they train in Canada all year in paddling, and it's like I see their videos, I'm like, holy crap, they're dressed, the only thing exposed is their eyeballs or something.
Yeah,
you're paddling and it's like 10 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit or whatever, and I'm like, I couldn't do that. I can't do that. I'm allergic to cold.
My dad is
so you wouldn't like paddling here.
No, my dad is in Newfoundland, and for many years, I guess it was his late 40s. He'd actually gotten cancer, and so he came through it. That wasn't fun, but I mean, it was one of the cancers that's very beatable, and so he got really passionate about sea kayaking was his thing. So he did a bunch of coursework and became fantastic at it. Did sea kayaking tours through the I think the spring, summer, and kind of fall months. But sometimes even you get icebergs coming down. So you've been out sea kayaking and you get icebergs floating down across Newfoundland. So he loved that stuff, and he did that stuff for years.
You can get crazy.
I've been out with him, but
if you're into those sports,
I'm not a water guy. So.
If you go to, we have Canmore and Banff and stuff, and kayaking's pretty crazy. Like the sport kayaks are freaking nuts. They're doing rolls, and they're not even like, I want to say they're like 5 feet long. Like they're not. It's crazy.
Yeah, those kayaks, they're built for more for maneuverability than doing long distance kayaking. So, like in stand up paddling, you have boards. The typical boards you rent tend to be short and wide, so that people who aren't used to it, it's somewhat stable. And then the race boards tend to be very long and narrow, so you sacrifice stability for speed. And in the southeastern coast of the United States and California and also Hawaii, there are large paddling communities, and mainly because of the weather and the ocean. Yeah. But some of these guys, I mean, they fly on these boards. I mean, it's amazing how fast you can be on a 14-foot board. So, but yeah, I do that. To me, I look at exercise, whether it was paddling, and before I used to love going to the gym. To be honest, I don't think I've gone to inside a gym, and God, it's been years because I'm always outside. But to me, a lot of it is, and I don't know if you treat exercise this way, but a lot of it is a mental break. And honestly, my head just feels better after I'm done. And so regardless of how you think your body might look or feel, my head feels a lot better. And days when I can't train or I have to take the day off, my head just doesn't feel the same. And I know there's data showing that people who exercise or exercise itself affects neurogenesis, it affects executive function, it affects cognition. We're not sure how it does it, and we know there might be slight differences in cardiovascular versus resistance training, but we know all exercise is good for the brain. And that's actually one of the areas of research that I'm going to start delving into in the near future.
I've got at least a couple of clients. They like to run, and my attitude towards running is if they enjoy it, go do it. I mean, I won't tell people to go running as a cardiovascular modality to drop weight, right? If they have to do conditioning work, but they like it, and they actually almost have a little bit of a habit of doing it more than the resistance training, which I think for the goals is still more important because it elevates their mood so much. They just feel really good. It clears their head. And so that is what they like doing. You know what? I want to jump back because you did mention creatine and brain health and stuff. I want to dabble into that a little bit. That's something we could always bring you back in if it's a topic we could elaborate on. But was there any little hot points about that seems to be popping out in the research?
Yeah, if you look at some of this data is fairly, sort of old. We're talking, a decade or less. But the best data, oddly enough, on creatine is when you give it to vegans. And, vegans, I don't know if they take creatine, but if they decided to, it would help memory. I mean, it actually helps working memory in people who are vegan. Why? Because they don't eat meat, and meat is the best source of creatine. So they get helped quite a bit. Some data on older people, it might help, cognition and executive function. So we know, I don't want to call them the most at-risk group, but groups where they're not young, fit people. These are older people. These are vegans. Creatine definitely helps the head. So we're actually going to do a study looking at younger people. So let's say 18 to 30. And I'm going to do a study on people who train, and I'm going to work with a group of psychologists. They're going to look at untrained people, which oddly enough, I might find more interesting. So let's deal with the untrained people. So these are basically college students who don't work out. So they're young and healthy, otherwise healthy. Will creatine affect their memory, what we call working memory or basic brain function? If we find that it does, let's imagine this. So we're dealing with young people who are otherwise healthy. That's a gigantic population. Yeah. In fact, most people don't work out. So
that's most
imagine
people.
If you find that this dietary supplement helps brain function, that's the selling point. I mean, forget the small. I mean, there's really people who train are such a tiny minority, both in Canada and the U.S. That if we find it helps untrained people, it's like, wow, that's kind of cool that it would help, working memory. And then we're going to do a similar study on trained people to see if it might help. But I think in trained people, because they tend to eat higher protein diets, if anything, it may not have an effect because they're already getting quite a bit of creatine.
That makes a lot of sense, and I was going to suspect as much there. This could be huge for, well, obviously supplement companies, because if you could suddenly turn around and market creatine to the masses, you've broken out of a very small niche. Now, I guess this also probably means creatine monohydrate, because from everything I've been able to gather, all of these specialized blends and formulas of creatine that are supposed to help delivery better, absorption better, it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. I think Purple K is totally debunked. But
it's just awesome because I think back to when I bought all the creatines as an 18-year-old kid. I got to get the ester one, the Purple K. Blah.
Wait. What's the purple?
Purple K is
Crealkaline.
Crealkaline. Sorry,
okay.
That was the first one that was out, right? It was Purple K.
That one I think has been thoroughly debunked as not actually working at all. And you get these other ones. I can't even remember what they're called, but there's no evidence to support that any of the other ones are superior to straight old creatine monohydrate, which is cheap as hell. It's cheap, and here's the thing: if you consume creatine monohydrate, then you get this dramatic elevation in the amount of creatine in skeletal muscle. I mean, what more do you want? I mean, skeletal muscle creatine goes through the roof. Even if you just do that, the 7-day loading phase or 5 to 7 day loading phase, skeletal muscle creatine goes up to 40%. So there's nothing else that'll do that, whether it's ethyl ester or creatine, pyruvate or whatever, creatine nitrate. It's almost like you've been driving a Ferrari and someone says, well, I got a car that's just as fast. Well, I don't know if it's just as fast. And we already have the Ferrari, so what's the point? So.
Well, creatine kills you.
Well, that's the other thing. People still have these beliefs that creatine's bad for your liver, creatine's bad for your kidneys. A lot of the same bullshit as protein.
You're going to have to write that in the study.
There's,
you're right. Oh, my God.
I don't think I've ever heard of evidence. I think creatine, as far as supplements go, I think it's probably the most studied out of all of them. Maybe that and protein. And there just simply is nothing wrong with it. There just is no downside that's ever seemed to
Kills football players because they run in the heat and don't drink water.
That's ephedrine.
Actually, no, it's funny you bring that up. Actually, the few NFL players or ex-NFL players I run into, because a lot of them will come into our lab, is I've always told them, you're in a contact sport where your heads are constantly getting hit. If anything, you guys should be on creatine just to protect your brain. You know, because there is data looking at traumatic brain injury in kids showing that when they're administered creatine, they actually recover better from traumatic brain injury or TBI. So we think, you know, if you're in a contact sport, whether it's a fight sports or some sort of football or rugby or something where heads might be colliding, you should be on creatine, on omega-3 fatty acids, maybe zinc. I mean, there might be some data on zinc, but definitely the omega-3 fatty acids and creatine are going to protect your brain. And so, you know, that alone, but even that, I tell my students, you know, the reason I've been taking creatine like 3 grams a day for like forever, like 20 years or whatever. And I tell them it has nothing to do with skeletal muscle. I think it's just good for my head. So I take it for my head. Because for me to gain lean mass, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's an inordinate amount of work. It's like, and I don't do it anymore. It's just work. I remember in grad school, just to tell you a quick story when I was doing my PhD. As a grad student, I had a lot of time sort of do stupid stuff. So I did the self-experiment. I'm like, I wonder how much just weight I could gain if I could just eat constantly for about 3 months. So my goal was this, to never be hungry for 3 months. And so I would just eat anything, rice, bananas, hamburgers. I would stuff my face, and I did it every day for 3 months. And I went from about 165 pounds to not quite 200 pounds.
Okay, so you did well.
What's that?
You did well.
Well, I went from a somewhat lean person to kind of a chunky person. I was like, okay, I'm a lot stronger. I can't move very well, and I feel really fat. But what I think was the most interesting thing is it was a lot of work. I mean, like, who can eat like this all the time? I just can't eat like this. So that was my phase of let's see how much weight I could gain just for fun. So
I try to do it generally, and it just even doing it lean, like just with regulation alone, like if I eat more, I do more. So I have to eat more than that. And like you said, it's a lot of work. So, and then to do it lean, I'm gaining 1 pound every month. Like it's just so, and I have to keep my volume. It's just fucking nuts. It's not easy.
To answer your question about like how hard I find it, you've met me. Jesus.
But even that's been years. Like we're talking. Like,
yeah, it's been years, but still, like, fuck, never mind. We're running out of time, so I really wanted to make sure that we really quickly asked you 2 things. One, we want to get a book you've been reading. You seem like the sort of guy who probably reads something maybe more than just textbooks. Do you have anything that you're like, nah, this book was sensational, everybody should read it?
Well, oddly enough, most of what I read isn't science. I don't know if you guys ever read, I read a lot of fiction, and most of it is what I will call in the sort of the thriller spy genre.
Cool.
I don't know if you're familiar with an author, Vince Flynn, and another one, Lee Child. In fact,
I've heard of Lee Child.
You might, Lee Child. He does the Jack Reacher series,
Okay,
and in fact, there's a couple movies.
Tom Cruise is Jack Reacher. That still hurts my brain.
Hey, thank you.
Reacher is 6'5" in the books.
How did that happen?
Tom Cruise is 4'3" or something like that. So fuck.
In fact,
and I can't take him seriously. Fuck. You know what? Go back and hear.
But they make him look tall in the movie. Taller than he is.
But we know he's Tom Cruise. Okay, Tom Cruise, like Top Gun, pre-Oprah couch jumping, is a pretty cool dude.
He makes good movies, man.
I can't do any more Tom Cruise.
Name a bad movie.
What?
Name a bad Tom Cruise movie.
I won't watch him anymore because I see him jumping on Oprah's couch, shaking her, doing this weird fucking shit, all that Scientology stuff. And I was like, this person is probably an alien.
No,
so
he wasn't on creatine.
Well, no, but it's funny you say that. The only people like the Reacher movies, but when I ask, have you read the books? They're like, well, no, I haven't read the books. I'm like, well, that's why, because Jack Reacher is 6'5" and he's a big badass, and Tom Cruise is 4'3". And here's the thing: I have to admit, Tom Cruise sort of pulls it off.
He does.
He does, and I'm like, well, they could have got. I mean, who's the guy in Gladiator? I forget his name. Russell Crowe.
Yeah, Russell
Crowe. Yeah.
He could have probably done that role better than Tom Cruise, but I think because Tom Cruise is such a big box office attraction, they're like, what the hell? We're gonna make Jack Reacher small. So.
Well, they're trying to combat
I
the
thought-
Bourne series. Like I think they thought Tom Cruise was going to take that movie off, and I think what it did was it broke even, but it just wasn't good.
Well, I
and
think
it should have been because the books have been great. Like my parents love them, and like the books have done really well.
I think
Yeah.
people, a lot of Hollywood now actually won't go out and use Tom Cruise in movies. Like there was a lot of talk about Tom Cruise as Iron Man, and that would have completely
No,
blown
that
the
would've-
franchise. That would have been terrible. Because Tom Cruise is invariably larger than any role he will ever play. It's why
Right.
when you cast Will Smith into something,
It's hard.
now Will Smith works, but Will Smith is bigger than someone. Suicide Squad, which is actually a pretty good movie, but I remember someone
Yeah.
quoting saying that Will Smithed all over the role, right? Oh hell
Right.
no!
Yeah.
And he's like Samuel L. Jackson, except Samuel can somehow pull this shit off.
Samuel's in everything.
I
It's like if you're going to make a big movie franchise or something, Samuel needs to be in there.
I think it's either him or Gary Oldman might be the all-time box office gross leader if you include every movie he's ever been in when you add them all up. So then again, the kids from Twilight also rank up there, which is pretty grotesque too. So
So Jack Reacher, you're going to Jack Reacher
yeah,
series.
go read some
Yeah,
Jack Reacher.
I love the Jack Reacher series. Although I must say the last few books have been kind of, I'm like, come on. I'm wondering if Lee Child is writing these last books or someone else, but I'm like, God, the original books were so great. I mean, if you get a chance to go through all the Jack Reacher series, they are awesome books.
Okay, and lastly, so we can end this on a note of where can people find you, well, online or just where's the best place to consume the stuff you put out there?
I think, I want people to be aware of the ISSN conference.
Yeah.
The website's simple. It's issn.net. That's
Easy.
issn.net. Also, I can be found on Facebook under Jose Antonio and Twitter, of course, Jose Antonio PhD in Twitter. And then on Instagram, a lot of the stuff I post related to the conference, the Instagram name is _ISSN, the ISSN. So I post a lot of science stuff on Twitter. You know what's funny about Twitter? Twitter is where there's a lot of pissed off people in Twitter. It's kind of funny. You can't, if you get in arguments, they never end. So I never get in arguments on Twitter, but I'll read them. In fact, do you ever read Layton Norton's stuff on Twitter?
Yeah, of course.
I'm like, holy crap. He's like arguing with all these people. I'm like, that's going to take a lot of energy. But I read it because it's kind of funny.
It's part of his character too, right? He plays it up at this point. He's such a really awesome guy in person. A real genuine dude. So, and it's like everybody who knows him says great things. And this is cool to have you on here because I've been hearing your name for a long time and following you for a while. But people always say kind things. People in our industry really like you and really respect you. So I hope our listeners will actually go and check out what you're doing. Anybody who likes these conferences, like I travel to a lot of them. We've got a whole bunch of local stuff coming up over the next several months. And so I got my one in. I've probably done my international traveling for the year. We'll see. But it was on my list. I ended up with 2 in the last 4 weeks. So
Well, make sure you guys plan on next year in 2020,
Florida sounds
Daytona
great.
Beach, Florida, ISSN, June 18 to 20
Ooh,
next
that's a
year.
good time.
I think I'm going to make that happen. Well, we'll let you go. I know you got to run. Thank you so much for being on here. And
Hey, thank you guys.
We're releasing this one now, so I'm going to send you. We'll send you some links and the graphic. And if you want to post
Okay.
them up, do it whenever you want. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Chat soon.
Hey,
All right.
thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Take it easy, man.
All right. Bye-bye.
Shut up and sit down.